Leor,
John,
what's up, dude?
how's it going?
Thanks for coming back.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. There's a lot to talk about today. We're living in a crazy world, and it seems like it's getting crazier.
Yes, sir.
How you been?
I've been good.
Yeah.
Good. Very busy.
I bet.
And at least finally we have a little bit of, certainty regarding everything through January 1st, 2023. So
Sure, that's probably
finally
not going to change.
we have a little we have some guidance.
Yeah.
But no, it's just been, every day is something new. There's so many holes in, how the law is written, so many employers, I'm getting a lot of emails from your clients. I'm getting questions from my adjusters left and right. Nobody knows, in so many areas how to move forward. And everybody's just trying to get back up and running.
Is there like an E&O exposure for you right now? Are you scared about that at all?
That is definitely above my pay grade.
Okay, because that would be one of the things.
Yeah.
I know it has to come down from Bruce. Like, here's our positions on things. Like, do likewise.
Yeah.
But I would imagine because of the fluidity of the situation, it might be like dancing in some gray area. And, hopefully you have a good relationship with all like your carriers, so they're not going to come back and say, hey, you told us to do this. And like, turns out that wasn't cool.
Yeah, I mean, definitely with all of our carriers, it's actually kind of interesting because, to a large degree, as an attorney, my job is to give them the best legal advice I possibly can. So at the same time, this is all risk management. So you have certain insurance companies that are saying, no, you know what, we're willing to roll the dice on this. We'd rather take more of a hardline approach. And our business model is, kind of deny things first, and then we'll see how it turns out. And then conversely, there are others who are like, no, we'd rather avoid penalty situations at every possible route. We don't want to be audited by the state. We like to kind of play it safer. As far as who's right and who's wrung, that's all risk management. Thoughts, exactly. Yeah. And, as you can see, when you shop around to different insurers, that's why they give you different rates. But at the same time, the ones that we, work well with are the ones that, take what we recommend, to a large degree. And then generally it's, hey, do you want A, B, or C? These are kind of the risks involved in any of these three routes. And then I recommend, this one, but, we're on board for helping you out if you want to go, the other two.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
So when you're talking about you being really busy, is that predominantly because of the changes that happen in legislation, or is this more because you guys are doing like kicking ass and bringing more clients on, or a mix of both?
Yeah, a lot of the above. So as far as COVID claims are concerned, most COVID claims are very standard in that they're being handled in-house by your adjusters because essentially it's just time loss. That's pretty much what the impact is. But we're getting some COVID death claims. We're getting some claims where the COVID is alleged to have aggravated some underlying conditions. So people that are on those higher risk factors, including obesity, diabetes, people who are smokers or already have respiratory problems. Those are the more complicated cases that we are getting through our office. And then on the flip side, it's our favorite thing to talk about, John. It's post-termination claims.
Woo!
So, it's the COVID layoffs have all come in. The ones that are temporary, we're rarely seeing claims filed, but essentially once those employees get that final notice from the employer saying, hey, it's not looking good, we're probably not going to be able to take you back. Many of them are running out to get attorneys, and, that's what we're doing. So
even though they're on unemployment?
Even if they're collecting unemployment, they can't double dip on disability, but there's nothing stopping them from filing claims.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's nonsense.
So, I've been getting a lot.
All right, so this is going to keep
happening.
This seems like it's going to be a persistent issue that folks are going to have to deal with.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's just get into the weeds a little bit. There's been some stuff that's happened recently in the past, few weeks, but I want to go back to when this first came out. We first had you on the podcast. Maybe it was the second one. When COVID just hit, there was a presumption of industrial. That has now been codified. So can you walk through what that actually looks like and what that means for our clients?
Yeah, so originally, Gavin Newsom had passed an emergency executive order, and like all emergency orders, it left a lot to be desired, but everybody was working off the seat of their pants. And That has now been codified, like you said, in SB 1159, which is now the law and has been signed by Gavin Newsom and passed by both houses. So that is the law of the land moving forward regarding COVID legislation through January 1st, 2023. And as far as that prior executive order is concerned, it essentially enshrined it with some minor tweaks. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on exactly what those tweaks were, since it only affected claims through July 5th, 2020. So we're already 3 months out. Those claims are essentially being handled by the adjusters one way or another. And it's really, not a super concern.
They're just benign issues.
It's more a matter of what's done is done. Exactly.
Okay.
So mostly, we just kind of left it in place with some minor clarifications and guidance on what type of testing needed to be done, who needed to do it, et cetera. But as far as moving forward, the parts that we care about is part 2 a little bit. Part 2 is discussing more those first line workers, and then part 3 is where I want to spend the bulk of our time, because that's what's going to affect 98% of employers, those people who aren't employing first responders.
Sure. So let's talk about that list of first responders. Like, that's relatively broad, and we don't want to get in the weeds on like what that might or might not exclude. But those first responders can be firefighters, police officers, frontline workers at the health. Would that be anybody in a hospital for the most part?
Yeah. So,
maybe excluding administration, but even then, I feel like there's a kind of an exposure there.
Yeah, they really did try to draw a line. So whereas the original executive order was just Thor throwing his hammer, and hitting everybody indiscriminately, this new legislation has tried to demarcate even medical professionals. So essentially, it's any medical professional that is directly working or exposed to COVID-19 patients. They are now entitled to this 30-day presumption that we discussed at the last podcast. And that would also include, expressly states, stuff like custodial workers. So if you have somebody cleaning, trash cans in a patient's room, and that patient is, in the COVID unit, and that patient has tested positive for COVID within 14 days, then that hospital worker is entitled to the presumption. If, somebody's bringing the food, those food trays. So anytime somebody working in the medical profession, essentially, and they are dealing directly with COVID patients, they're going to be entitled to that presumption. On the flip side, let's say you have an ophthalmologist. Well, he's working inside Kaiser, but he never goes near a COVID patient. He's not going to be entitled to that presumption. You have custodial staff who are, just working around the rest of the hospital. Unless they're going into the COVID units, unless they're working directly with COVID patients, they don't get the presumption, and they go into this third category we're going to discuss, which is, a claim just like everybody else.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you want to move on to that third part?
Let's do it, because this is the heavy lifting, and we're going to talk a little bit about how it affects the employers and what it's going to do to how the claims are administered. But I want to spend a lot of time on the back end talking about these new reporting requirements that is now enshrined. And this is a reporting requirement for employers and what they have to do when they find out about a COVID claim. So I want to spend most of our time there. But before I do, let's kind of talk about some of this, the regulatory framework, which will explain why this reporting requirement was instituted.
Let's do it.
So the law essentially is stating that COVID claims are no longer subject to the presumption unless there's this new category of outbreak established. So they're saying, look, if somebody gets COVID and they happen to have performed work at the workplace within 14 days, then we are no longer just automatically going to give them that special status, because who knows? Maybe they got it at the supermarket. Maybe they got it, going to see, their friends or, family, et cetera. So we don't know what they're doing in their off time. So the presumption is now no longer an across-the-board presumption. Instead, you're only going to get that presumption when there is an outbreak. And an outbreak is going to be determined by the number of people who have tested positive for COVID at your place of, specific place of employment, and also dependent on how many employees you have.
Got it.
So that standard is 1 as a baseline. Right off the bat, you have to have 5 or more. So if we're talking about your local yogurt shop, what do they have? 2-3 employees there, Jamba Juice. So these employers that have under 5 employees, automatically, no presumption, they are subject to the exact same standard comp rule. So if somebody gets COVID at one of these places and they want to file a claim, fantastic. You just send it to your insurance adjuster.
90 days.
90 days, exactly. Everything regular.
Okay.
On the flip side...
Can I ask a dumb question?
Always.
Better than anyone. Hey, so in regards to the amount of employees, so let's use that yogurt shop, it would be the amount of employees working at a specific time or the amount of W-2s that you have on the books?
Great question, John, and here's why.
I love it.
It's because the law doesn't say. This law, just like others, so many holes. So what we as defense attorneys are trying to do, and as generally what judges are trying to do, we're always trying to interpret what the legislature meant to do, and we want to find reasonable outcomes. So it would be ridiculous to just go by W-2s, because let's say, let's have Jackson, and Jackson owns 30 different yogurt shops across California. Well, if every single one of those yogurt shops has only 4 workers working there, and suddenly you're going to hold him to the standard of, oh yeah, we have more than 5 employees total, even though 5 or more aren't being exposed to each other at any given time. That would be silly. So
it would be silly, but yeah.
So we're going to operate under the assumption that the legislature isn't being silly.
Sure.
So your question is basically correct, that we're assuming that it is location specific as the 5 or more, even if technically you have more employees. So, but let me give you an example. Let's say you have 3 factories, warehouses, how about? Let's call them 3 warehouses. So you're doing shipping and receiving, and you have 3 warehouses. If those 3 warehouses, let's say, have 4 employees each, and they're all in a line. Well, if technically these 3 warehouses are completely standalone, and they operate with different customers, and there is no interaction and movement across, let's say, these 3 separate buildings, I would argue that maybe it doesn't apply to those 3 buildings because they are essentially separate places of business.
Sure.
But on the flip side, if you have a situation where employees are going to and from the various locations.
Common lunchroom between the 3 facilities, stuff like that.
Yeah, especially if they're shared places, or maybe they have to go to the multiple job sites. We'll discuss that. That would now start to count toward this total number that we're discussing. So
the magic number is 5 over 5 employees.
Exactly. So you got to have 5 employees as a baseline. Then the next category of employer is employers that have anywhere from 5 to 100. So if you have 5 to 100 employees, an outbreak will have occurred when you have 4 or more positive COVID tests within a 14-day period, a single 14-day period.
Okay.
So essentially another thing that isn't addressed by the code, where we're just inserting ourselves and doing our best, is on what is that date. So the date that we're going to assume is most reasonable is the date that the COVID test was collected, as opposed to the date when you got the result back.
That makes sense.
Exactly. We know from the time you took the test, it was 14 days before that when you might have been exposed. And if it was more than that, then it wouldn't be. And some places are taking longer to process than others. So to clarify, it's from the date of the test sample taken, 4 or more employees. Now, once you have 4 employees that get exposed to COVID, regardless of where it was, that's when that presumption is going to kick in.
Got it.
And once that presumption kicks in, the legislature did us a small favor by giving us 45 days instead of 30. So the 30 days is still going to apply to all the frontline workers, like we discussed, all those people that we would expect to get COVID. But for the rest of us, it's going to be that 45-day period. Now, the next category is 101 plus. So the 101 plus, what they did is they said, okay, now we're going to do a 4% standard. So if within 14 day, any given 14-day period, If 4% of your workforce tested positive for COVID, then now there is an outbreak considered, and everybody's going to get that presumption.
Nonsense. Okay. So
malarkey.
Yeah. So we're
horse pucky.
So a lot of clients out there that are running operations with 300 to 500 employees, doesn't take a lot of folks to contract that, to, deem it an outbreak, which is now putting your loss runs at serious jeopardy of, turning your loss ratio from, potentially 30% to over 100%. And that can screw up the underwriting. So as an employer listening to this, obviously, most of our clients are taking measures to protect their employees and have a safe place to work, making the proper social distancing, sanitation. How much does that, or if any, does that weigh into like presuming they got this at work?
Yeah.
Right? Is that even taken into account?
It is.
Okay.
So once again, the legislature did throw us a small bone here, and it codifies the importance of allowing the employer to rebut that, the presumption by establishing exactly what those procedures were, how much precautions were taken to help their employees from getting COVID. So, for example, I was actually, down at one of your employers' places of business, and I looked around. Every 20 feet, there was a giant jug of hand sanitizer. All around posted, there were the 6 feet, apart rules. I even saw tape around all the workstations, and those were all 6 feet. The employee lunch areas, there were little tapes, kind of squares in front of the tables where, kind of demarcating where people could sit 6 feet apart. When we walked in, somebody was wearing a mask, took my temperature before I walked onto the premises. So it's like all those things, if you have that employer, that a case to me is like, okay, I don't, this is something that I'm really going to want to investigate, and maybe we deny this one. Maybe we say no. It's, considering the fact that, the employer took all these precautions, we don't think you got it at work, even though this presumption would apply.
So I know what employer you're talking about. Would you give them an A in regards to doing the appropriate steps to give you guys an opportunity to deny a claim?
Yeah, and I mean, there was also, masks on offer. There were gloves being used. People weren't using the face shields since there were, hundreds of workers. So that's just not feasible. But regardless, all of these factors are definitely going to help. And then on the flip side, if you have an employer where, everybody's just encouraged to stay 6 feet apart, but there aren't signs everywhere. There's one jug of hand sanitizer only when you walk in. If I ask, hey, has anybody been written up for not following COVID procedure? When I hear no, that's kind of a bad thing, because you have to assume employees, kind of need some reminders and make some examples before people start falling into line. Well, nobody violated COVID procedure?
Okay, so that's a good little trick,
Yeah.
right? So like, hey, let's write some people up. For sure, right?
1,000%.
Okay.
That's going to be a big one.
Hey, good information. If you have people, even if they're doing everything right, write them up.
Another thing is, hold a COVID presentation, talk about it, and, offer out maybe pamphlets or something. But the point
And
is,
have every single employee sign that they went through that. Formalize a safety program. Formalize a COVID safety program specifically. All that?
1,000%.
Wow. So excited we're getting down to business. It really seems like an efficient way to conduct ourselves.
Yeah, and and we've kind of talked about this before, that that concept of nobody wants to be oppositional with their employees. Managers don't like to be hard asses, why don't we say? But there doesn't necessarily need to be you're going to be fired level of punishment for this write up. But it's just more a matter of, I have a paper trail demonstrating that this employer is like, hey, look, your first COVID violation, nothing happens. Second COVID violation, okay, now you're really on notice. Third COVID violation, 1 day suspension, no pay. That's not the end of the world.
So not the same constructive discharge you'd have with other violations.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to have different, these are COVID violations and these are serious and willful violations that you shouldn't be doing in our business.
I mean, look, at the same time, like, COVID's scary. I mean, I know that, we're finally getting more and more statistics, and exactly how contagious this is, it's not nearly as bad as we thought it was. But regardless, there are a lot of people that are concerned. A lot of people, like we said, who, do have the underlying diabetes, do have those kind of risk factors. So, each individual employer kind of course, you decide how you want to govern and police your employees. But what's more important for us is just demonstration that you are enforcing this level of safety to ensure that, you're doing everything you can to mitigate a potential outbreak at your place of employment.
Got it. That makes sense. I think that's super important. I really do. I think it's one of those things that, like, you're on the hook. If you don't do it right, like, sorry. Like, it's one of the things the government's going to come down on you. What kind of fines are associated with this too?
So let me get to that in a second.
Okay.
But they're so essentially the fines have now been codified, and they are tied to the reporting requirements of the employer.
Got it.
So right off the bat, essentially, there's very little guidance on these fines. All we know is that you can be assessed a fine up to $10,000 for intentionally misleading or failing to comply with these reporting requirements and reporting to your claims adjuster. So it's one of those situations where once the report is made to the adjuster, you kind of hand the baton over, and then it's out of your hands.
Sure.
But the employer needs to follow these rules and needs to report these claims in the fashion that I'm about to discuss. Otherwise, the labor commissioner can come in and start slapping out some heavy fines.
Some hefty fines. Okay, so maybe before we jump into that, I guess I have some questions in regards to what kind of defense that you guys could present for our employers. So obviously, if the employers are demonstrably showing that they've done whatever they can to enforce their COVID policies, make sure they have a safe work environment. Even then, what if employees are being knuckleheads on the weekend and being irresponsible and contract it somewhere else, and we have social media evidence? So that's one of the things that we do at Whiteboard is we want to make sure that we're trying to catch fraud. So we'll monitor social media, and if we see someone at a quinceañera, could that be a reasonable defense?
Absolutely. And once again, the legislature codified that for us. So on the flip side of overcoming the presumption and what the employer did, they expressly acknowledge that when we're trying to overcome that presumption, we are allowed to establish what their own habits were, what they were doing on their own time. So if we can show that they're, like you said, going to parties, they're going out to their intramural paintball league.
Sick.
I don't know what they're doing on their weekends. I don't know what paintball spots are open, but definitely that's all relevant. Social media stuff, absolutely. The only thing I will caution employers to do is there is some case law that came out. You can't friend your employer just to get access to their Facebook or their social media. So
what if you want to be friends with them?
If you're friends already, then that's fine. And if there's
that's so vague, that's super vague.
But you can't essentially you can't friend them specifically for the purpose of trying to see what they were up to that weekend to try to overcome that presumption, because that could be an invasion of privacy. So
interesting. Don't you have to accept a friendship? Wouldn't that be like an invitation? Yeah, it's hey, can we be friends? And then you have to say, yeah, we're friends. That's what that is.
Yes.
You have to accept it. That's nonsense.
But
okay.
You have to prove that you really have a personal interest in this person. No, I wanted to hear about your Furby collection. That's really what this was about. Just
I can't imagine that
toys.
Conversation. Someone on the other side's no, you have to really be friends with them. Oh, really? Okay. Let's move on. I'm going to get frustrated with the way
I don't even think you've seen The Office. I know that was one of our shared interests.
Yeah. So awesome. You were saying
so basically so one of the two things we're going to use to overcome that presumption is what was the employee up to and what was the employer doing. So let's move on to this report requirement, because this is the big deal here. And what the new requirements are is the employer has to report 4 pieces of information every single time they find out about a COVID diagnosis. Now, I want to clarify that this is whether or not your employee is claiming they got it at work or not. Either way, you have to report it, but it does make a difference on what you're going to report depending on what the employee says.
Got it.
So let's start with the scenario where the employee claims they got it at work. And once again, as we know with workers' comp in general, all you got to do is claim.
Sure.
And it's called a claim form for a reason.
Yeah.
But in this scenario, you have an employee, he comes to you on Monday and says, hey, I was starting to feel a little sick on Friday. Saturday, I went and got my COVID test. Yesterday, I got back my results. I'm positive. Fantastic. So what does the employer have to do? And he's saying, I got it at work. That's important. So the employer first, you have to contact your insurance adjuster administrator within 3 days. So you have 3 days to report this, and the method of delivery is any. But it does have to be in writing. So you have to either contact them by email, by fax, or by mail.
Not by text?
You know what? It doesn't say text, but if you want to screenshot that and prove later on that you texted, I'd have to check again, but maybe.
Yeah.
Our argument should be enough. I mean, if
Yeah,
email's
I
enough,
think so.
text should be
Why not?
solid. And, I know I text with my adjusters that I'm super close with
a
regularly.
ton,
So
a ton of employees text like that, for sure.
Mainly because we want to talk about the office. And,
Yeah, exactly.
But, so first off the bat, you're going to text them or email them, etc. Look what you got me doing.
Yeah, sorry, dude.
It's definitely text. It's only text.
Yeah.
Brought to you by Verizon. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
So you have to tell them the name of the employee. The next one is you have to tell them the date that they tested positive. And once again, like we said, this is the date the specimen was collected, not the date they found out. And the reason is because we're assuming that 14-day period that we're trying to figure out, that's going to be whether or not, X employees tested positive based on testing date.
Sure.
During that 2-week period. So you have to tell them that. Number 3 is a tough one. Number 3 is you have to tell them all of the places where they worked during the 14 days leading up to their their positive test. So for most people, they're going to the same place every single day, working at the same station. That's easy. Where it gets a little weird is what is a specific place of business?
Yeah.
What are the number of places? So if we're talking about maybe a delivery driver who is reporting to 4 different warehouses, I would definitely say that, if he's picking up shipments at 4 different warehouses, all 4 of those warehouses would need to be listed as the locations where he worked.
Got it. What about folks that are potentially working in a manufacturing plant and they're rotating machines? Something like that. So a different part of the same building.
If it's under, I'm making this up as I go, but why don't we call this the one roof theory, right?
Okay.
So essentially, if you're under one roof, if you're in one building, if people are going from part to part, then it's kind of one fluid exposure. Then that's one place of business.
Okay. That makes sense.
But once again, if you're at a place where even if it's a single campus, but people don't interact with each other. Maybe it's a defense contractor, and you have, because security clearance, you can't go to certain portions of the building, and the employees never talk to each other, and they don't interact. Okay, maybe that's separate, and you don't need to list, any other location. Where it can get a little squirrely would be potentially, like I said, delivery drivers. So I can say in the Amazon model, let's say, we work with Amazon. They're one of our clients, and those delivery drivers, they go to a warehouse, they're collecting all their shipment. Well, when they come to my house, if the gate's open, they leave it at my doorstep. If the gate's closed, they just throw it over the fence. Hopefully nothing breaks.
Sure.
But either way, they never talked to me. They never interacted with me. That doesn't sound like a specific place of employment to me. So you don't need to list as the employer all 150 delivery addresses where they made their deliveries. But on the flip side, like I said, let's say maybe it's a guy who's picking up from multiple locations, or maybe it's an employee who's rotating, different factories. He's working at different locations each day. Well, you have to do that 14-day, investigation, essentially, that backtrack. So more work for the employer.
That's
but
a
it
ton.
behooves you to keep track. You have
That
to
would
start
be
keeping
that'd be
track.
so difficult for most employers. I don't even understand how you'd be compliant with that. Like unless you're literally having some like geotagging, like in regards to like your payroll system. Like I don't know how you keep track of something like that.
Well, you want not a funny story, a scary story. I got a friend working for the UC system, and they are advising their employees, this is voluntary, but we're asking that you install this app imported from, I don't know, Japan, Korea, one of these places that does these types of tracking. And it's
Nice.
specifically, hey, if anybody contracts COVID and you were within, because it works out Bluetooth, so anybody that pinged you within 14 days, we're going to send you notification. But she was asking,
Hey,
about
can
it.
I download this? I feel like it's important for me to have this too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we should all get it. Let's everybody get on this one. Go ahead.
I could hear your eye roll from here.
Dude, it's so scary. That is scary. That's super freaky. Let's stay on task. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I do that. Okay.
I told her she did not need to
Yeah.
download that application. Your employer can't force you, at least so far. Moving right along.
Yeah. Give it a
But,
second.
Yeah. But okay, so that's part 3. You got to say where they worked within 14 days. Now, here's the equally onerous portion of it is number 4. You then have to send a report of how many employees worked at every single location within 45 days preceding that positive test.
How are people running businesses? Like that seems so crazy. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
That's a ton of work.
Well, so, you know, sorry.
is there? Go
Like,
ahead.
let me clarify, actually. No, I said it wrong. It's not that you need to send them all 45 days. It's that you need to send them the date and or actually, you don't say the date, but you basically need to report the highest number of employees that worked at all of those locations within 45 days.
So you don't have to actually list out the names. It would just be giving the numbers of employees working.
Yeah, no. You definitely do. Yeah, for privacy reasons, you're not reporting names. It's just what is the number of employees at each location.
Okay. That's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Still a lot of
Yeah.
work. Like what kind of compliance like cost in regards to if you don't know, like, hey, I don't know exactly where you worked for the last 14 days. What happens then?
That's up to how much the labor commissioner wants to charge you.
Really?
And if it's me, I'm just going to go back on a payroll. And if my payroll is only by week, you want to err on the side of caution. You want to err on the side of, I'm going to assume every single person worked every single day because you don't want to underreport. That's where you get into a penalty situation.
Yeah.
So,
That makes sense.
Err on the high side of the number of employees worked per day. But see, what's interesting about this is on the flip side, that could actually be problematic because the higher number of employees that worked over that 100 mark, now we're trying to get to that 4%.
Yeah.
So if you have over 100 employees, maybe you underreport. You know, you err on the side of caution, there being less employees.
To prevent that outbreak status?
No, because then theoretically, okay, well, if you're saying that you had, the highest day was, 1,000 employees, let's say, but really there were only 800. Well, then on that day, if there were only 800 at your highest day
30.
and not 1,000, then 4% of 800 would be a smaller number than 4% of 1,000.
Got it.
So you definitely don't want to over-report.
So just hit it on the head. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then if that
You still have to
wasn't-
like make a product or a service and like turn a profit, right?
Wait, these are businesses?
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay. Keep going.
So that is the new normal moving forward. September 17th, 2020, when this went into effect. So for every single employee beginning on September 17th, moving forward until January 1st, 2023, this is what you do. You report the name of the employee. If they're saying it was industrial, you're reporting all the places where they worked. 2 is you report the day of the test when they tested positive. 3, you report all the places where they worked within 14 days. 4, you report the highest number of employees at each specific location where they worked. On the flip side, for claims and COVID tests that go back to 7/6. So it's July 6th through September 16th. If you recall, the governor's order expired July 5th. So we've been operating in this limbo. So for that period of just July 6, 2020 through September 16th, 2020, you need to go back and you need to now report to your insurance adjuster all of those 4 data points that we just discussed before October 29th, 2020, theoretically, after which you may be subject to a penalty. I wouldn't be as concerned just because this just got passed, but essentially you have about 2 weeks to get all that data together. And the caveat is regarding that number 4, about that highest number of employees in 45 days, just for this July 6th through September 16th, they just want the highest number regardless. So they're not doing the 45-day, they're just doing the whole period.
The whole period.
Whole period, what was the highest number? And then beginning on September 17th, moving forward, that's when we're doing, 45 days back only.
Beautiful, simple, elegant solution to this problem. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what the governor and the legislature has now mandated for every employer moving forward. As if you didn't have enough on your plate, this is what you have to do moving forward. But like I said, all you have to do is at least provide this information, and then now the burden switches to the adjuster to do all the calculations about how many employees tested positive within how many days, if the presumption applies, if it doesn't, how many days do I have to investigate, etc. You have enough on your plate, just handle this reporting, and the adjuster will handle the rest.
That is simple. That is good advice right there. Okay, well that's a ton, man. That's encouraging that you and your firm are so well versed in the law and have done the due diligence, and we're so thankful we have you on the team to do all this, because it is like we obviously have thousands of other claims outside of COVID that we're managing and doing that. So it's really great to have you guys as a resource, and it's really great to have you on representing our clients. You know, that's awesome, man. So I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure.
With that said, this is a little bit of nonsense. Do you see any relief in regards to, you said this goes till 2023?
Yeah, January 1st, 2023 is when it expires, unless it's extended in any capacity.
Extended, do you see it ever being amended to be like, hey, we're no longer going to do this?
You know what? I think now we're getting more into the realm of, where is this vaccine coming in?
Sure.
And that's going to be, I would argue, the single most important, moment in history is when we start getting rolled out of those vaccines. And everything is going to be subject to if and when. So if that vaccine rollout goes well, and my personal guesstimations, my crystal ball, I'm hoping we start to see major rollout in maybe September or so of next year. So I'm assuming we got about another year.
So where everybody has access to it?
Exactly. Well, I mean, everybody's a strong word where, now your company is able to kind of bring in a nurse and, do what they used to do with the flu vaccine. So, they're going to start rolling it out
we
to
still
everybody.
do that. Yeah.
So if that happens, and we have, 50% vaccination rates by mid 2022, I could see a good argument for not extending this. And at that point, as long as your employer maybe is offering the vaccine, if you voluntarily decline it, now you're back in the bus with, the 90-day rules.
Sure.
The 90-day standard. But if you got your vaccine and then you still get COVID, maybe there'll be something for that, because we don't know how.
For sure there will be, yeah.
Efficacy is going to be, okay, now you can sit up front, you can get your presumption, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's definitely going to be interesting. If I could kind of ask you, because this is something that, me on my end, doing the litigation side, we're not as involved with the premiums. We're not as involved with, the XMODs, which is where I come to you to answer a lot of the questions that I get from, many people on my end. So has there been any additional guidance by the insurance commissioner on what's happening COVID-wise?
So every insurance company has taken this in stride. And so kind of like how there's a presumption for first responders, Because of that, there's obviously increased risk for the insurance companies to take on, and the actuaries are saying that this is going to cost now more money. So for folks on the front line, their base rates are going to go up because they're incurring a greater risk. For other adjacent companies, so for like home health care, folks that like probably wouldn't be on that first responders list but still have an increased risk of contracting COVID, rates are going to go up there too. So we've been in a soft market, which is essentially year over year decreases in rates for insurance for, I think, for the past decade. So it was like so right as long as I've been in this industry, and I think it's about to turn around. And I think this is going to exacerbate it. So I think insurance premiums across the board are going to go up. We've already seen it in the auto market, and this is just another catalyst to get to the work comp market that's going to take an increase. In regards to the X-mods, none of the COVID claims impact our clients' X-mods. That doesn't mean that they're not going to impact your premiums, because the underwriters are still going to take into account the losses compared to the premium that they're taking in. So while it won't impact you in a mathematical way where they just multiply your base rates by your X-mod, it is going to skew the loss ratio, I would imagine. And if you have a good agent, like, they should be explaining what you guys have done to demonstrably show that, like, COVID is going to be as non-issue as possible at this place, because we are doing all the appropriate, social distancing, as well as, all the steps that businesses should be taking to protect their employees. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, it's going to be a yes. I don't think it's going to be as impactful as, as most other claims.
Well, you know what? Then let me quickly jump in on one extra thing that I did forget.
Sure.
Which is, because once again, this does go into more of the administration aspect, and this is what, your claims administrator is here for. It's what your insurance is here for. But as far as the time loss that these employees, may be entitled to on accepted claims or claims where they're not timely denied, depending on what time frame we're dealing with. Once again, we have now codified the fact that if you have specific sick pay, or it's any of those additional COVID-related leave acts which your business is subject to, then those benefits need to be exhausted before the insurance company starts paying.
Okay, so really quick question. So when you say sick leave, does that include PTO?
It has to be, and once nobody's litigated this yet, but if you look at the express language of the code, it says specifically for, in response to COVID. So arguably, if the employer said, hey, if you end up getting COVID, we're giving you a week of COVID PTO in anticipation of maybe you getting COVID, then probably. But if it's just standard PTO, we thought that maybe when the governor's order, because it had kind of been similarly worded, we were like, oh, it has to be everything. Well, no, it seems like the legislature was like specific in that it has to be COVID related.
There's a ton of companies that don't outline like PTO compared to sick time. Like, that is the more popular thing to do because it's safer to do it that way. So there might need to be a restructuring of how you do your PTO and sick
maybe
leave.
Or you just say, I'm just going to allow my insurance to cover any COVID related losses, or
which is what we're recommending.
Time off.
Whiteboard as a whole, we're recommending the insurance company take on that burden.
He is John, and he supports this message.
Yeah, we're out. One more thing, Leor. In regards to your role here, dealing with our clients and their claims, what kind of interaction are you seeing? Have you had any of our clients come with COVID claims? Has that happened yet?
I have not had a whiteboard COVID claim yet, but I do get a lot of email inquiries, whether forwarded, from your claims handlers or just, direct to me asking questions, particularly about SB 1159. But I definitely want to mention, you can definitely throw up my card. I'm always available if you do have any questions about, how to mitigate exposure or have any questions about your current comp claims, COVID-19. Definitely, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'll try to make some time.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate it. One more thing I want to do, which I think is going to be really important, is there is a lot of information here We went over a brief cursory overview of what it was, but I do think a lot of employers are going to want to know the nuts and bolts of what this legislation is, what this means for them, and what they can do to help protect their business and their employees. So you and I have talked about doing a webinar that hopefully will be live, and so we can actually have folks call in, ask you or potentially Bruce any questions, record that so we can actually send that out. So that is going to be coming down in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So be looking out for that. But beyond that, Leor, thank you, man. I really appreciate the time. Absolutely. I really appreciate your diligence going over all this. I know Bruce did a ton too. It looks like he did the whole thing. But you guys' understanding is infinitely valuable. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, John. Namaste.
Sweet dude. Namaste. Thanks, guys. Talk to you next week.
Hey, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. I just wanted to provide a little bit more clarification in case it wasn't clear during my discussion with John. Namely, the employer requirements regarding reporting COVID-19 positive tests. Both applies for employees that are either claiming that it's an industrial cause or non-industrial cause. So to clarify, when there is a positive COVID test, or you're informed by an employee that they have a positive COVID test, the employer has the following obligations. First, they, of course, within 3 days have to provide the claims adjuster with the fact that there was a positive test. Now, where the difference comes in is if the employee is claiming that either they got it at work or they are alleging they got it at work without substantiation, that is enough to require the employer to provide the name of the employee. Conversely, if the employee either doesn't know where they got the infection or they know they got it from outside work, that infection needs to be reported to the claims adjuster so they can determine that outbreak criteria, but you don't need to provide their name. So you don't identify the employee who tested positive unless either they are claiming that is industrial or you know that they got it at the workplace. Then, of course, you're going to provide the date that the employee tested positive, the address of all the places where they worked within the 14-day period preceding the positive test, and finally, the highest number of employees who reported to work at each of these locations in the 45 days preceding the positive test. So I hope that clarified everything, but there is clearly a lot going on, many moving parts. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me or my firm, Albert & McKenzie, and you can always reach me by email at lmakover@albmac.com. That's lmockover@albmac.com. Thank you and wish you all well. Good luck.